So Abby mentioned a few people in attendance at Bohemian Grove. Here's actually a direct quote from former President Richard Nixon. He said in his memoirs, "If I were to choose the speech that gave me the most pleasure and satisfaction in my political career, it would have been my lakeside speech at the Bohemian Grove in July 1967. Because this speech traditionally was off the record, it received no publicity at the time. But in many ways, important ways, it marked the first milestone on my presidency." And, sentiments like this make people wonder how many other milestones have been marked at the Grove and why, after so long, so little has been leaked about what goes on. Joining me now to talk more about this is RT correspondent Abby Martin. And Abby, I know you spent most of this weekend in Monterey, right outside the gates of the Grove. What was it like?
It was interesting, Christine, definitely different than previous years. As you said, there was definitely a lot of secrecy going on, so we couldn't really get inside, but we did see a lot of people outside. There was a Creation of Care festival. It was the first time that the Occupy movement had really come into full force and is calling out the power structures pretty much all over the world. First, we had the Bilderberg group where the Occupy movement kind of merged with those protesters, and now we see them here protesting the Bohemian Grove and its secrecy.
You talked, Abby, in your piece about, people wonder why the redwoods are only for the 1%. But, let's break this down. I mean, this is private property. The owner has the right to do what he wants, invite who he wants to his property. Talk about why some of these critics and protesters are most angry about what goes on inside.
That's a good point, Christine. I think people are upset. Yes, it is private property and he does have a right to invite whoever he wants. But when we know for sure that certain policies have come out of the Grove, we know that Nixon and Reagan sat under a tree and Reagan agreed to have Nixon wait to run. We know that the Manhattan Project was originated in the Grove. And those are just what we know. When you have 2,000 of the world's top echelon of media moguls, CEOs, and high-profile politicians getting together, of course, business deals are going to be made, politics are going to be discussed, and who else knows what is really going on there. So I think people are just really outraged about it's just another closed-door meeting that the public has no say at all in what goes on or no say in any really discussions that happen there.
Yeah, and Abby, as you know, I was there last year, and there are some really interesting stories. The one you mentioned, how Nixon and Reagan spoke, and Reagan agreed to hold off on running for president. It is, certain policy decisions that do come out that affect a lot of people. You touched a little bit upon this, but go into a little detail. I mean, things are different this year than when I was there last year. Because 2 months after last year's Bohemian Grove took place, the Occupy Wall Street movement began. I guess talk a little bit about the role this has played, the 1% versus the 99%, and how that's playing outside the walls of the Grove.
Sure. I think people, they're recognizing that this is the 1% of people in the world. We have millionaires, billionaires. I mean, you cannot, you have to be pretty rich to get in there. There are 128 camps with 20 to 50 people in these camps. Each one has a full bar and, very rich, wealthy elite going in there from all echelons of society. And what really happened this year was the first time that the Occupy movement recognized, hey, the Bohemian Grove is really something that we should be calling out and occupying. So they made an event, Occupy Bohemian Grove, just as they have before, just dovetailing off this whole movement of the 99% versus the 1%. And they had an event in the Monterey Amphitheater, which is about a mile outside the gates of the Grove. And all day they had speakers, bands. They had a woman from the Mothers of Fukushima that was there just because she knew that, the nuclear program was basically started here decades ago. So she was calling out nuclear, the radiation and everything that's happening in Fukushima, and just kind of tying it back to the policies that were originated in these redwoods, Christine. And a lot of the occupiers were just saying, we want a voice. We want to be heard. Just because we don't have money doesn't mean that we should not have a say in the democratic process that the society should be built on, and that was built on. And then you had a big march from everyone that was there, this Creation of Care festival, which of course was to counteract the cremation of care ritual that these people do in the Bohemian, which is very interesting. It's 50 people in monk robes walking around, and they cremate a coffin effigy to a giant 40-foot owl named Moloch. So these people were having their own, creative to say, we want care. We don't want to burn our way and pretend like nothing's happening, when there's so much starvation and war and all these things that are happening pretty much at the hands of what they say are the people who are inside the Grove kind of celebrating their own power. So we saw a march to the gates of the Grove where, of course, they were met with riot police and a pretty tense standoff there. There was one arrest of a 75-year-old man who crossed the police line.
So you talk about all these protesters who have come sort of as part of the Occupy movement, which is new this year. What about inside, on the other side of those walls, Abby? I mean, is there any evidence that those who attend this, retreat have changed their tune or at least are a little more sympathetic to the 99% cause?
I don't know, Christina. I haven't talked to anyone except, of course, Peter Phillips, the professor and former director of Project Censored, who did attend 3 days, did his dissertation on the Grove, where he did see business deals being made firsthand. He did see a lot of business discussion and policy discussion. But of course, after he did that, they did close it off to journalists and everyone who is invited, who is a media mogul, like you said in your intros, kind of sworn to secrecy about what happens there. But, as far as them changing their tune, I think it's just that power structure that people are battling in the world right now, which is that whole 99% versus 1%.
Yeah, I remember
their voices heard.
I remember, Abby, when I was outside, standing outside the gates, a lot of the people sort of driving in on their cars, their very nice cars, I should mention, sort of waving at the protesters and kind of thinking it was a little circus. Let me ask you real quick, in terms of people who have attended, I know you mentioned a few. We found this audio recording of President Nixon. I wanted to play it really quick and then we can talk about it.
The Bohemian Grove that I attend from time to time, the Easterners and the others that come there, but it is the most thing you will ever imagine in San Francisco crowd because it's just terrible. I mean, I don't want to shake hands with anybody in San Francisco.
So the president there referring to these rumors of homosexual acts, of grown men running around naked. I mean, is this something that people still talk about that happens today?
Well, absolutely. I mean, of course, there are many rumors with an event with so little coverage, Christine. Of course, a lot of wild speculation is going to come out of it. But there has been confirmed that, there is a gay camp there. There are camps, and with so many bizarre things coming out that we do know about. I mean, we saw Mark Dice, who is an author who had a rare and now a yearbook that's released every decade from the Grove, and there were many photos of men in drag. I mean, it's basically a big celebration of themselves, and since it was only a men club, they do have multiple members forming plays and whatnot. But there have been reports during the 70s and the 80s primarily of homosexual activity. But, a lot of speculation, really. But that is an interesting quote from Nixon there, especially considering that he said that his best speech had come from the Grove.
Yeah, no, interesting stuff. And certainly, we should say for so many years, there was chatter about Bohemian Grove, and it was thought of as a conspiracy theory, even though the mainstream media still doesn't talk about this at all. You're there, Abby. A lot of alternative publications are there. We have the internet now. So it is becoming more mainstream in terms of people at least acknowledging that it happens, that it exists. Appreciate you weighing in today. RT correspondent Abby Martin.